Greetings, everyone. My name is Robert, and I have been working as a long-haul truck driver in the northern United States for over 15 years. I have spent much of my life in this profession, traveling the roads day and night to deliver merchandise, regardless of the weather conditions. However, there was one night in particular, while driving on a deserted highway, when I had an experience that still baffles me and continues to raise questions in my mind without answers. One night, while driving on a completely empty road around 2 in the morning, there were no signs of other vehicles and everything was quiet. Despite having the heating on, I began to feel an inexplicable cold that seemed to penetrate my bones. The night passed calmly. As usual, I was listening to music when, suddenly, I saw a woman in a long white dress on the side of the road. It was very strange to find someone there at that time, in the middle of nowhere. She seemed disoriented and I thought she might need help, so I decided to stop. In my years as a driver, I have seen many things, but nothing had prepared me for what was about to happen. The road was very dark and lonely, with no lights or traffic, only illuminated by the headlights of my truck, which made it even more dangerous for a woman to be there. I pulled over to the side of the road, and without saying a word, the woman approached and climbed into the passenger seat. I figured she was scared by the thought of getting into a stranger's truck in the middle of nowhere. So I decided not to question her behavior and tried to empathize with what she might be feeling. However, his gaze seemed lost, and his skin was so pale that it reflected the light of the headlights, giving him a disturbing appearance. I continued driving, listening for any sign of an accident or any explanation as to why she was in that desolate place. I asked him where he was going or if he needed help, but he didn't answer. During the ride, the woman seemed to be in a nervous state, constantly looking back as if someone or something was following her. I tried to talk to her about trivial topics to calm her down and distract her attention from the road, but she still didn't respond. His eyes never left the road behind us, which made me feel increasingly alert, as if we were in danger. The atmosphere in the truck was already tense, but his behavior made it even more disturbing. I insisted on offering her my phone to call someone, but she just looked at it like she didn't understand what I was talking about. My concern grew, since I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know if I should call 911 or the police, or just wait for her to say something. She was clearly traumatized, and I didn't want her to feel any more pressure. I decided to continue a few more kilometers with the intention of calling the emergency services if she didn't decide to talk. But finally, a few minutes later, the woman pointed forward, mentioning that the accident had occurred a few meters away, near a very sharp and narrow curve. I knew it was true. Her eyes reflected a deep and authentic fear. I could see the terror reflected on his face, something that shook me too much. I kept driving and slowed down, hoping to find some trace of the accident, like debris from the collision or crashed cars, but there was nothing there. I stopped the truck just before the curve, took my flashlight and went out to inspect a little, but the road was deserted. I got back into the truck while I asked her if she was absolutely sure it was there on that curve. The woman continued with her instructions, but I felt increasingly uneasy. I began to think that, perhaps disoriented, she'd been pointing out the wrong locations of the supposed accident. That road, which I knew well, felt strange that night. The atmosphere was dense, as if a negative energy enveloped the place. As we advanced, the temperature dropped noticeably. Curiously, the woman seemed calmer, almost serene, as if the cold comforted her. Finally, after traveling several kilometers, he pointed out an old house in very poor condition, with overgrown vegetation, broken windows, and a dim light that illuminated the entrance, and as we approached, the light began to flicker, which made the entire even more gloomy situation. She insisted that I stop there, because that's where she lived, and it gave me great relief to bring her back home safely. I was parking the truck, almost reaching the entrance, when I turned to tell her that I would walk her to the door, but she was gone. I went white when I realized he had disappeared. Almost in shock, I got out of the truck and looked everywhere for her, but there was no sign of her. I knocked on the door several times, even though it was already 3 in the morning. Through the window, I could see that everything was dark inside. Just as I was about to leave, an old woman opened the door. He looked at me with a mix of dismay and empathy. I explained to him that I had brought a woman who claimed to be his daughter and described what she looked like, but that, inexplicably, she was no longer in the truck, and I didn't understand how she disappeared if I had never stopped. My whole body was shaking. I was fighting not to despair, but the idea that this woman had disappeared was difficult to accept. The old woman, opening the door, was silent for a moment, until her expression changed to one of deep pain. In a whisper, he revealed to me that his daughter had died in an accident on that road many years ago. According to her, her daughter always tried to return home, but never made it. At that moment, I felt like everything around me was collapsing. An indescribable chill invaded me. The woman's presence had been so compelling that it was difficult for me to accept what had happened. Noticing my confusion, the old woman offered me to enter her house to have a coffee, but with great pity for that old woman, I rejected her invitation. I felt the need to get away from there as soon as possible. Before he could say anything, the old woman, moving slowly, turned around and left the door open. He said, "Son, wait a minute." After a minute, he returned with something in his hands, a photo of his daughter. Seeing the image, I gasped. It was the same woman who had been with me in the truck. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I decided to return to my truck and continue my trip to get home as soon as possible. With shaky legs, I got in, started the engine, and drove away from the place. As I pulled away, I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror and thinking about what had just happened. The strange feeling accompanied me throughout the journey. That night, the road, which had always been a routine workplace, became a mysterious and terrifying place for me. And after several hours on the road, I arrived home with a feeling so disconcerting that I couldn't sleep. I felt the presence of that woman in every corner, as if she accompanied me wherever I went. Since then, every time I pass by that road, I can't help but look at the point where I found her, and the house where she had taken me that night. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a story I don't share with other drivers or anyone else. It is a memory that I preferred to keep to myself for many years, until now. Because despite continuing with this work, my concern never dissipated. The truck, which used to be a safe and familiar haven, felt cold and strange. I couldn't stop thinking about the old woman and her daughter, about the tragic fate that separated them forever, but that somehow brought them back together through tragedy. I tried to find a logical explanation, but what I experienced was clearly a paranormal event. The road was never the same for me. What was once just another route in my routine became a reminder of how mysterious the world can be and the things we cannot explain or understand. That presence always accompanies me along the way, an experience that I cannot forget and that changed my perception of reality forever. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.